Rene Tan is the director and co-founder of RT+Q Architects in Singapore. RT+Q was founded in Singapore in 2003 by Rene and TK Keck. Since its founding, the practice has been exploring architecture as an interdisciplinary craft that combines both the elusive beauty of art and the rigors of building technology. RT+Q has completed numerous projects, built and unbuilt, ranging from individual houses, residential towers, commercial and office complexes, master planning and architectural interiors. Smaller scale projects allow experimentation with materials and detailing, whilst the larger ones explore issues of scale and form in urban contexts. RT+Q has received numerous awards and mentions in both Singapore and internationally for their work. Welcome, Rene.
Thank you.
So we will begin with, let me get this set up. This is a brief introduction from Brigitte Bouvier, who is the director of Foundation Le Corbusier.
On behalf of the Fondation Le Corbusier, I would like to thank all of those who made this exhibition possible, with very special thanks to Rene. The exhibited models of Le Corbusier are the product of his interns who started at his agency by studying and building a scaled model of the Le Corbusier project. Rene takes also his collaborators to France to discover and experience the architecture of Le Corbusier. This opportunity is a perfect way to understand Le Corbusier's spirit, who never studied architecture in school, but spent many years of his youth visiting architectural designs all around the world, learning from them and from different experiences to develop his own unique and unconventional style. This exhibition is linked to the core mission of the Foundation Le Corbusier established when he was still alive, to contribute to the knowledge, understanding, and influence of his ideas and work. We are grateful to all of you to contribute to our mission, and more important, the challenge we are facing today, the relevance of Le Corbusier to the younger generations. With the end of architectural modernism, Le Corbusier has lost part of its aura as an unrivaled master, constantly present to the mind of young architects. He is now part of history. Speaking of the present, this is for us an essential question. How to ensure that Le Corbusier is relevant to future generations? Three possible answers. First, the legacy of modernism is everywhere. The key to the future is to understand it better, especially since we will have to renovate more and more, rather than demolishing and building something entirely new. Second, the aesthetics quality and the emotion. There is something in architecture that transcends through time. This is evident in the case of Le Corbusier, but of course not only. Third, how does architecture cope with a given context? Architecture is a lesson in the relevance of design for society and culture. The issues of housing for a modern man and housing for the greatest number is a major challenge facing our societies today and modern architecture in particular. It was also the major challenge for Le Corbusier. I hope that while our world is currently living with the fear of the other, the architecture of Le Corbusier, rooted in the dialogue between generations, countries, and culture, will continue to inspire us. This is, I hope, the experience we are all sharing today, and I thank you to make it possible.
Ready?
Yep.
How do we? Okay,
Thank you.
all yours.
Great. I'm very grateful to the University of Texas at Arlington for being generous hosts to these architectural refugees, or nomads as I've been calling them. And I particularly want to thank Chuck for making this happen. We have been talking about this for more than a year. And I thought that today I should just spend some time talking about the background, because people ask us all sorts of things about the origins. This is the 29th of 55 stops across continents. And as you can imagine, lately, the craze in Singapore was Taylor Swift visiting. So there were a few Taylor Swift fans in the office. So I said, it's not enough to know Taylor Swift songs, but how many stops in this world tour? So there was a matter of debate, but in the end, they figured there were about 50. So we are looking at about 55 stops, and this also gives me a sense of the ongoing thing that this thing is going to experience. I'm not going to talk about Corbusier because we are not historians or or scholars, but just an office with an idea. Now, what you are seeing now today is only pretty much half of the collection, because last year there was a request to borrow some models for an exhibition that Jean-Louis Cohen was doing in Shanghai. So we reprinted 15 models, and the 15 has become 99. And we currently have these two sets of models, the red series, so to speak, serving the western route, and then the blue series touring the eastern corridor. And the hope is that since there is interest from Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel, perhaps at some point both could meet in the Middle East. This little project came from COVID. We usually take our office somewhere in Europe to visit things, and since we couldn't travel, we thought we could bring architecture to us and to even pass it on to other people. The Foundation Le Corbusier has been very supportive and even grateful for what we are doing. And about a year ago, they proclaimed us best ambassadors abroad. But about 2 weeks ago, they have dropped the word abroad. So we are very happy for their support. And Brigitte Bouvier is always happy to do a pre-recorded video when she can. On the idea, it's actually, there is only one idea, and it has become a tradition at our office where we get the interns to build a Le Corbusier model the first week of their tenure at our office, whether it's 2 months or 6 months. Only because when interns come, no one is prepared to give them work to do. And after 3 hours, I come down, I still see interns sitting there. I said this would stop. So the idea was to expose them to the works of good architecture and great architects, rather than asking them to make coffee or buy newspapers or clean the floor or tidy up the library. Now, on why Le Corbusier, people ask me, Rene, why not other architects? Very simple, for 2 reasons. Number one, it was the easiest to build. We started with the purist houses, and we started very modestly with cardboard models. But I think the more important reason was I always felt that Corbusier was an encyclopedic architect who built across continents, geography, materials, form, so on and so forth. And I think there is something in Corbusier for everyone. On the environment, I thought it was worthwhile looking at Corbusier because today, especially maybe in the East and elsewhere also, everyone is very concerned about weather, so on and so forth. And I've always thought that Corb in his early works, not early works, maybe 40s, 50s, 60s, along with architects of that generation, they were the precursors of architecture and sustainability in their own way in those days. Working and living from Singapore, you cannot avoid, as Mehrdad would say, the ghost of Le Corbusier. And I was actually very surprised to see the Singapore cityscape resembling the drawing that Corb had done. Crossing the Rubicon, this is an important slide I like to show. I was teaching at Syracuse 94, 95, 96. And one day, the Dean, Bruce Abbey, calls me down to his office, and my natural reaction is, oops, what have I done, or what have I not done? It was actually the latter. Asked me if I had any plans for the summer. I said, there's none. So he said, why don't we give you a grant of $5,000? Was a lot of money to me. Just go to Europe and see as much Le Corbusier, and mind you, Palladio as well. Otherwise, don't come back. That was the implicit message. So I took the money and I started looking at architecture. And subsequently, my wife, Wei Wei, followed me around looking at Corbusier. And then when Lara came along, it was another experience because looking at architecture from the point of view of a kid actually taught me a few things, because she would outrun me and point out like, hey, check this out, how cool can this be? But now Lara is in college, so I don't have any traveling companions anymore. She wants to be an opera singer, and the mother's worried. Now, I counted a few times. I think there are about 66 Le Corbusier buildings left standing in the world. Since then, I have never stopped. I tried to see as many as possible. I've seen, I believe, 58 of them. And the ones in red are the ones I've not seen. So on a good day, Lara tells me, hey, you're a pretty focused chap. But on a bad day, my wife tells me it's an obsession. Now, on logical conclusions and physical manifestations, I went to graduate school at Princeton, and I think we knew and heard a little bit more about Corb because of this famous photograph of the visit between the two men. And if you look closely at this graduating picture in 1990 at Princeton, the graduating class, right in the middle is a certain Sarah Whiting, who's now the dean at Harvard. I taught at Syracuse, 94, 95, and 96, and I must say, if there is a certain teacher, mentor, or gentleman that influenced my thinking, it must be Werner Seligman. And I was just chatting with Bijan earlier about this gentleman and his passion for teaching. And but he is no longer with us. But I spent a lot of hours getting one-to-one lectures on Le Corbusier by Werner, even at 9, 10 o'clock at night. And he was just talking. I was just a happy recipient of all these lessons. And of course, he was one of the members of the Texas Rangers. I'm sure everyone here knows this book. Today, we are a practicing office in Singapore, RT and Q Architects. We have been around for about 20 years. We do all sorts of things, from architecture for animals, for living, for the dead, so on and so forth. We're just happy and grateful to have some work to get by. We try to take the office out of the office and just let the orchestra play. And that was the best lesson I learned studying music as an undergraduate when I went to Yale. So don't overconduct. And when we have time, we teach. We are adjuncts at the two Singapore universities. But we always see teaching as a form of celebration, taking the school out of the school. And it's always about pairing a famous architect and a famous city. So we take them to look at Adolf Loos and Wagner in Vienna, or Brunelleschi in Florence, Corbusier in Paris, or Chandigarh and so forth. Now on interns, I think often overlooked, but I think they are the actual heroes of this exhibition. And we see them getting excited over daily chores and making friends and establishing rapport one another and making that usually miserable time meaningful with us. So too bad I don't see too many students here, but anyone who's interested in coming to Singapore for a few weeks or months, come by, feel free. Now on process, yeah. Michael Graves tells me that, Rene, the best way to learn about anything is just to trace. Don't even read, don't even look, just trace the bloody plans and you'll learn something. So in terms of building these models, I realized too that it's more difficult than I thought. It's not as though it's, as I always say, like baking cake. You know, the model will just come out of the oven. But these guys actually have to draw every damn thing and really think about the process. And we operate with two these days very small and modest laser printers and 3D printers. So they cannot print anything too big, and they have to think about how to decompose it into various components. On saucers, people ask us, so Rene, what do they look at? I think while it's incomplete, the Oeuvre Complete is still the best source to go to. And even contemporary photographs and all that may not necessarily tell the best story because, like the Village 9, the facade has been renovated. So we go back to either old photographs or even drawings from Oeuvre Complete. On finding, very often the interns will come to me, Rene, we can't find enough drawings. What do I do? So just search harder. And with YouTube and even Google Earth, you can actually see a lot of things. Because sometimes Corbusier also leaves rather vague sketches and not enough to, for them to get by. On first, this is the 29th stop. The first exhibition was held at the Alliance Française in Singapore in conjunction with the Singapore Institute of Architects. Word got out that we had some models of this French architect, so they came to us. And at that first exhibition, we only had 45 models, and it has actually grown quite exponentially. On reaching out, we offer this collection of models free of charge to anyone, any institution interested. We don't charge fees, honorariums, royalties. We don't even ask for insurances, because if we were to lose half the models here through some manner, we'll just wait for the next interns to come rebuild them. So it's rather self-sustaining in its own way. On ambassadors, I don't usually come. My wife already thinks I'm obsessed with this. I don't come on all occasions and openings. So we send colleagues over to represent the office and to meet friends, to give talks. It is an unsaid requirement that everyone in the office must be able to give at least a 15-minute talk on the exhibition, if not the Corbusier. If nothing else, just enjoy a boat ride on the Bosphorus. On DIY and a self-sustaining world tour, I think the secret to this exhibition is not even the models, but the pedestals that come with it. So it's a one-stop kind of thing, and I'm actually very, very impressed with Arden and Chuck for putting this thing up. I found out even without students. Usually there will be about 4 or 5 students and it's put up within 4 to 5 hours, I hear. But it's supposed to be very simple, and I will repeat again, it is the secret of the pedestals, and we have actually improved this in our other set of models. On flexibility, it's designed in such a way it's lightweight, it can be reconfigured in any way. And I may have told some people, we even wrote to the Palladio Foundation in Vicenza, offering this thing and showing them how they could do this, but I never heard back from them. On transportation, that is the other important thing. Packed into 5 crates, quite hardy, and I can see after 29 stops, it's still quite strong. It has got to be simple. And we don't even, as I mentioned, ask for insurances or anything. We just want to make it so dumb and simple for everyone. On misadventures, Twice, the models got stopped for about a week, once at the EU and Hungarian border because of some kind of misinterpretation about coming into the EU with old passports, you must leave, not with new passports, because these models do travel with these carnets, which are model passports and visas. And when it came to Canada, because the previous host stamped on the wrong box, the whole damn thing was delayed for a week. And I'm told the Canadians take their bureaucracy very seriously. So anyway, on going digital, we have had calls. Rene, it's very difficult to bring the models over. How about just sending us the digital files? We'll reprint the models ourselves, and we can even do a digital version. So I asked the interns, hey, what do you think of the idea? Everyone said no, because it's their hard work. So I tell them, hey guys, you just need to learn to share. On responses, it's been quite well received. In Portugal, the national newspaper covered it, and they were surprised that this came from Singapore, of all places. But they were actually very happy to see physical things in this digital age. We have been given some awards and recognition, and as I always say, it's not the models, but in the packaging and the setup and the flexibility of this thing that probably has kept it moving. People ask me, Rene, so what have you yourself learned from all these things? I'll tell you very, very easily. On relevance and diversity. And the three U's, the unbuilt, the unknown, and the unseen projects. Because we have all actually been in school learning the greatest hits, so to speak. And it's always a Madame in Poissy or a certain Michael Stein in Gosh. But when I look back at a lot of the works, Corp has actually done work for all people, including refugees, peons, laborers, so on and so forth. And my favorite it's just that. It's the Maison Mehrdad. It was pretty much do-it-yourself housing for refugees. Corp had anticipated the refugee crisis even before World War II had ended, but it was never built. So of the 66 still standing, we have models for all of them. And looking deeper into the Corbusier Foundation archives, there are about 216, we counted and recounted this thing, unrealized projects, of which you can see in the darker pictures, we have models of unbuilt projects, lost projects, unfinished projects. He actually did a little bit of work on this dam that was already being built when he came to India. Pretty much an unknown project because it was lying in the bottom of the sand for the longest time. And the unseen, even with the greatest hits, I tell the interns, hey, let's take a new look at all these famous things. So we have been doing a lot of section models and rediscovered projects. And this thing right here is actually the chapel of the Venice Hospital that was never built. But Corp had actually drawn, I think, enough for the interns at least to make some sense out of it. And this is the second last slide. When I went to Barcelona, a certain Alejandro Laponzina, a scholar, asked me, Rene, hey, do you know that he did something in Venezuela? I said, no, I have never heard of this. So apparently it was a funerary chapel for a slain leader that was never built. But I think in model form we can get a sense of what it would have been like. Next stop, North Carolina, Charlotte. Thank you. Every time I give this talk, it gets shorter and shorter.
All right, so thanks, Rene, thanks. That I think it's been an amazing day of looking at the work of Corbusier from very different perspectives, but I think also from very complementary ones. On my end, the work of Le Corbusier was almost like a given, in the sense of for any young architect studying architecture in Spain in the 1980s and 1990s, he was the masters were the main source of knowledge and wisdom on architecture. And first, the first thing you needed to learn if you learned architecture was learn about the masters. And Le Corbusier was probably the most respected one, right? And one of the main ways in which we learn about Le Corbusier, Mies, and Alto, and so on, but especially Le Corbusier was actually through redrawing his work. Right? I remember perfectly these descripts from one of my professors, rare descripts. There was like a couple of them per semester, not many at that time. Which was, I was working in this roof, inhabited roof garden and so on, and then he told me, and I asked, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to make the stairs, so it's relevant to get up there, it's not in the middle of the building. And he told me, look for roofs in Le Corbusier's buildings and redraw them. Right? And that completely transformed the project and was one of my favorite projects. I think it was something like 13 or something like that. So this takes me to maybe the first question that I want to ask, and I want to start getting both of yours perspectives, which would be this idea of learning through doing, right? I think obviously in the work, in the exhibition, in this kind of notion of having the interns doing the models as a basic, as a first introduction in the work of the in the office is and you mentioned that explicitly, Rene, this idea that don't think, don't write, just do, just draw. I think that's obviously is present there, but also in this morning's lecture, that you mentioned at some point, like I'm not interested so much. It did call my attention because it's it's something. It's a statement that at the same time I heavily disagree with, but I also believe in it, like almost like with faith. Like, yeah, it's right. Which is the idea that no, ideas are not that important. It's the object, it's the outcomes that matter, right? We need to register the outcomes. So this idea of the learning as a doing, is there, and it's a question that I ask myself, like an educator, an architect, are there elements, contents, depths in architecture that we cannot grasp unless we do them, either by drawing, either by building a model, and are there ways in which we cannot grasp things in such a complex overlay like the one by Corbusier, that we cannot grasp it until we have built it ourselves, right, with our hands, or drawn it ourselves?
I think in Le Corbusier's case, it is particularly important to build models of these things because for me at least, the emotive aspects of Corbusier's works are the most powerful things that I think he has handed down to us. Seeing the light, whether it's La Tourette or Ronchon or Firmin or any other project. And through drawings, it's hard to really experience it. But through model making, and especially if it is big enough, you can actually get a sense of the quality of the space and the illumination, whether on a good day or a cloudy day or a rainy day of it. So I think there is value in getting these interns to build things. And if nothing else, also just using their hands, because these days, you ask them, can you check something? They'll touch their mouse. Can you measure something? They'll touch their mouse as well. Can you draw something? Can you sketch something? They'll touch their mouse. So I think these models are important because it is the closest manifestation of the real thing. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's certainly in the case of Le Corbusier, and I don't want to generalize because I've done work on this particular building. We know that he was a master of not only building, but also kind of didactic thinking, right? So in early 20s, he put out Domino. I mean, just to think, okay, here's somebody who was very young at that point, did not go through architecture school, worked for the Perret brothers, who were reinforced concrete pioneers, worked for Peter Behrens, working on the AEG, right? So he's been around engineers, and he's looking at engineers and the work of engineers, and to be able to take what's out there and kind of compress it and really juice it in a way that comes out this structural diagram, which is not really a structural diagram, but it's actually an aesthetic proposal, right? It's a structural diagram that pushes an architectural proposal out there. So we know that he was a didactic master for sure. So he never did anything without ideas. And he, as I mentioned earlier today, he at least himself purported that he would, put stuff up there and just kind of let it simmer for a certain length of time, and then something would come out. This kind of a genius thing would come out. And to a great degree, they did. But in my view, I think that's probably half of the equation. It's not the full story. Certainly in the case of the mill owners building, it's half of the story. So if you look, we did today, right? You look at those early sketches and they kind of roughly resemble the final product, but they are not the final product. So it's really truly a combination of these ideas, which are really genius ways of putting together a significant amount of information about context, site, sun, air, water, this, that, program, cost, and coming up with something and then massaging it and working it. So learning by doing, right? So then comes this period of constantly changing it and manipulating it and pulling back and so on and so forth. He has multiple stories about, so this genius story is one of them, but there are others where in his famous book, Towards a New Architecture, he talks about the relationship between the engineer and the plastic artist. And there are different ways of seeing this. So he talks about the engineer does his or her thing, and there comes the plastic artist. And, this person will chisel stuff into shape, right? There's the person who will bring light and texture and form, right? So there is a kind of sequence to do it. And then he presents it like this. But you look at a building like the mill owner's building, and it's exactly the reverse, right? So there's the plastic artist, this kind of genius who puts out this thing, and then he keeps reworking almost as what he would call an engineer would do, which is to deal with all the utilitarian stuff. But all of the utilitarian stuff is at the end the thing that gives shape, gives form, and also gives you mentioned the word emotive, right? It's all that stuff that you walk into a space and you're like, wow, where am I? Like light, form, texture, everything. So I would say it matters significantly, this learning from doing, but it isn't everything. Like there is this push and pull, this kind of tug between them. And I imagine that if I could live long enough to look at many buildings, there probably are multiple stories of how they came about. Some may have started with more prosaic utilitarian stuff and then had other things added and so on. So I see him struggling with these two poles constantly. Sometimes I think one comes first, and maybe another time another one comes first.
With the poles, because you mentioned that also, with the pole of control and systematization against the pole or against exception and different.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? That
yeah.
this kind of back and forth.
Yes. I would say, I've used the terms of systematicity and improvisation, where systematicity belongs to. I mean, if you think about Vitruvius, really, we don't have to go that far back, but let's look at Vitruvius: firmness, commodity, delight. Like firmness and commodity fit the systematicity, fit the kind of utilitarian aspects of architecture. And then there's this delight. Like, how do we make delight? Nobody explained it. And Corb doesn't either, for sure. Like, he doesn't explain how he makes delight. And, Vitruvius didn't, Alberti didn't, nobody could explain it. The best they can do is, well, geometric forms, the Platonic forms are beautiful, right? If we can make a square plan, that's beautiful, right? So there's this other thing that he's striving for. This is what I mentioned earlier today, which is like, how do creative people work? What is it that draws them to make this amazing stuff? And this, to me, is the interest in relationship to Corbusier, which is this, he's pulled between these two poles. But he does painting, he does sculpture for sure, but that's not his work. His work is architecture, because I think he loves all of the structure that comes with architecture. If you look at Corbusier paintings, they're similar in that there's always some kind of a geometric structure, and in it there are these free-floating things, objects, which are, some look like weird fish, animal, whale, this, that. Can't always figure out what they are, and there is geometric structure to them. So yes, I would say indeed those two poles are certainly what attracts me to his work, but there's more.
I think I just wanted to pick up on the two poles. For me, I think Corbusier is elusive, and that is probably why he remains an enigma even 150 years later. I think just when you think that Corb would do it this way, he is always, I think, 2 steps ahead of us. And looking at the way Chuck has set up this exhibition chronologically, you can actually look very clearly at how his works have evolved. And the interesting question always is, what would he do if he were alive today? That's the first question. Second thing is, if he had a chance to go back to an earlier work, to do an extension to the Villa Savoye or any other thing, what would he do? But we never got a chance to see that, because I think Corb never, as far as I know, never or rarely went back to do something. And I'm only aware of that because in our practice these days, because when COVID came along, people wanted to go back and revisit their projects with us. So we have had, on occasions, gone back and really redid what we did. So it would have been interesting to see what Corb would do.
So a little bit of a follow-up on that, discussing actually tackling on the question of what we can make of Le Corbusier today, right? From a current perspective, in a moment, with all of the complexity that we're experiencing, culturally, the change of culture, the way that the cultures have merged globally. The world is so different than technology, computers, etc., than when he was conceiving his buildings. So how would you guys encourage, and I think both of you probably would, students, a 20-year-old, 22-year-old student that is, needs references for a studio project, and how do you convince them to go to projects that are 60, 70 years old, that were made with a material that probably would be almost impossible to achieve the kind of qualities that he specific projects like the ones in India, or we were discussing before, or some of his other concrete buildings. How would you guys encourage these people these students that have access to all of this huge catalog of possible references and projects from all times to focus on this figure? Why should they do it? Why do you guys think they would get out of a character like this?
You go first.
Good question. I think that question has been answered in part of the studios that we have been trying to do in Singapore. Looking at the old values and ideas and trying to make it relevant today. When we teach Palladio, we don't expect students to design like Palladio today, but to be able to understand the essence of what Palladio had given us, namely proportion, scale, and try to learn from the old, then apply to the current. So I think the first thing is to tell students, since we are in a school setting, to be a little bit more open-minded and to have a balanced diet. I mean, continue doing and learning the contemporary stuff, but I think it is important to look back and to learn something. After all, particularly I think the Corbusier, there is so much in his work that one can learn from. If one is interested in doing a all steel, aluminum and glass building, you have the Zurich Pavilion to look at. If you want to do vaulted roofs, you have stuff to look at. If you want to do more traditional vernacular stuff in timber, you have things to look at. I do believe that there is relevance in because Corb to me is a very encyclopedic architect, more so than a lot of the other big names, even Kahn or Mies van der Rohe or X or Y or Z, only because his works is so broad, and there is something in Corb, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, that's a tough one, David, to answer. I mean, I'm an academic, so I teach studios and so on, but I hardly ever send students after projects to look at, just as a way that I work and teach. You asked about learn from doing. That's how I actually work in studio. I place students in environments where they have to respond to some context and learn from their own actions on that context. But I don't think that's what you were really interested in with that question. I mean, I think that there's a certain didactic nature to Le Corbusier's work that makes it teachable. We can look at development across time. We could look at development in one project, and it is teachable. You literally can, that's sort of what I did earlier today. You could look at the structure of a building and figure out what he was thinking, what context he was working in. So that part, the didactic part, is, I think, certainly there and makes him very teachable. The other thing, which I hadn't thought about, but I did after you mentioned it, has to do with this kind of material condition. If you have not been to the Heidi Weber Pavilion in Zurich, if you are anywhere within the vicinity, go there. It blew my mind when I was there. I didn't know Le Corbusier as a metal architect, right? I mean, he's like brick and concrete, and you go there and you realize, wow, this person truly, in the most profound way, was investigating the role that materials play in architecture. And his vocabulary is not one that's applied. from one building to the next. Rather, it's one, excuse me, that is invented based on the problems at hand. So trying to figure out, how do I do a steel building? And he's for sure, I haven't done research work on this project, so I can't say for sure, but he must have been looking at shipbuilding, because there are these gigantic plates of steel that have been welded up together. And so he really developed all of that vocabulary from the material. And certainly he had done many concrete frame buildings prior to the building I'm looking at in Ahmedabad. But just to recognize the possibility of gaining aesthetic content from roughly made concrete, right? This is genius. We don't think about it anymore now, right? Because examples exist out there and we can kind of reference things, but to recognize that, look, I'm not going to get this like finely finished product that I'm getting out of Switzerland. I'm not going to get that in Ahmedabad, India. I better figure out how to make a project out of roughness. And it's really profound the way that he was working. So I think this issue of materials and the relationship of architecture to materials and invention of vocabulary and forms and spaces out of a certain sensibility of materials is another thing we can learn for sure, and also perhaps teach to students by looking at these examples. There probably are others, but.
Yeah, David, talking about materials, I was just thinking, I think it's fair to say at this point that the only metallic-looking building that Corp did was the Zurich Pavilion. But it is not as though that it was not on his mind. He wrote about ships, ocean liners, machines for living in, airplanes. He looked at motor cars, so on and so forth. So I think this metallic aspect has been in his vocabulary for the longest time. And he never just had an opportunity. And when you look at some of the unbuilt works, the Bata Pavilion, the Nestle Pavilion that has been destroyed, the pavilion for the World Expo in 1935 that was built and destroyed. These are pretty metallic things, but the world, and for me, for the longest time, I never knew about it because they were either unbuilt or demolished. But of course, then we have Zurich at the end of his career. So, as I think there's something for everyone in Corp. That's why it makes it, I think, easy to teach. And talking about teaching, I spend a bit of time waiting for Chuck and this and that. Looking at the drawings outside, I must say the works are damn good. And why? Because very difficult to get students in Singapore to produce things like this. Maybe it's just that the world is moving too fast in Asia. But from what I can see, sections are well drawn, with detail, well printed, so on and so forth. So I wanted to say this because when the works are good, you don't just praise the students, but the faculty as well. So I'm really glad that at UT Arlington there's been work like this that maybe I'm a part of the older generation, can relate to. Yeah, in many places we can't even get students to draw a damn section, but the drawings out there are beautiful. So I'm really, really very glad to be in this environment.
So I'd like to ask another question, but I warn everyone that I'm going to open up the discussion, and I'm sure there's a lot of fans of the work of Corbusier and the opportunity you have in these two persons here. I think you guys can take advantage of that and ask your questions. But going back to what you said about this connecting, because I thinking about the exhibition and about the very exercise of thinking about the Corbusier 2024, I couldn't help but feeling or asking myself at least whether this is an exercise in nostalgia, right? I will be nostalgic, and you said that before, I said that before. I was thinking about my own, when I was learning about the masters in the School of Madrid and so on. So I'm wondering whether isn't there a kind of a contradiction in its own terms about thinking about an architect like Corbusier, who's very clearly, and I think Mehrdad, you mentioned that explicitly or implicitly in your lecture before, who is an architect of the future, who's an architect who's always like reinventing, thinking new ways of doing things. Metal, what do I do with metal in a new way? So what do we do with this? What do we do with an architect who's trying to innovate and thinking about the future, but that now is undoubtedly of the past, right? How can we deal with that in a way that is not forgotten, or it is not dismissed, as I'm sure we don't want to, but at the same time is actually, it's actualized or brought to the present in a way that can be relevant. I don't know that this is, I don't know if it's a question or more like a reflection.
Picking up on Corbusier as an architect of the future, I think he truly was, for a few reasons. So because of these Eastern group of models, I've been going to China quite often. And the cities that they built there today blows my mind. Just when I think that Singapore has got its fair share of high-rise buildings, density in land-scarce Singapore. In China, they are building everything that Corbusier couldn't do 100 years ago. And that's only half the story, because lately also, I'm sure we are all aware, all these new cities in the Arabian desert and all that, apparently they are building it. Mm-hmm. And then when I look back at the urban sketches, whether it's Bogota or Sao Paulo or Algiers that Corbusier had sketched out but never built, they are doing it right now. Yeah.
It's more like the world was not ready for it.
The world was not ready for him. That is to put it rather simply. Yeah.
So I'd like to open up to everyone. Do you guys have any comments, discussion, questions?
I'd like to continue on your question. I think so many young artists, so many young architects, it's these visions that people have, and they know this building is not going to happen now. And I hear that in that kind of way. What is this tension between the imagined and the non-built works and the built works? And I'd love for a little bit more exploration about that, because I think it's an important thing. I know a few years ago there was an architect who came in, Brown, who was at Princeton, and he could never get anybody to let him have a seat at the table. So he created the seat by saying, 20 years from now, this is what my buildings will look like. Mm-hmm. And the next thing you knew, he was at the table. And I'm simplifying it, but I think there's something there, and I would love for a lot more exploration of the unbuilt being built and how that, creates this world and hope for the younger generation.
Yeah, I think the unbuilt works, I've always said, I think the merits of this group of models lies in the three U's: the unbuilt, the unknown, or the unfinished, so on and so forth. I think there are lots of things there that the world has missed, because we were educated, I'll be the first to admit, on the greatest hits. And I've written to schools, and I've had responses enough to know the thinking out there. Schools have written back politely saying that looks interesting, very nice, but we have our own Corbusier models collection, and they actually show them to us. Mm-hmm. And they're usually about 10 to 12 of the greatest hits. And And those actually come from the French schools and the Swiss schools. But looking at a lot of things that were never built, I think there is a lot more. And the thing that strikes me most is that he actually represented and designed for a great cross-section and diversity of society. We always thought that he only built for the madames out in Poissy or the rich and famous bankers in Paris. But Cobb actually did a lot of work for the ordinary men. House for engineers, house for laborers, house for this, house for the farmers. They were never built. Looking at it, it has actually changed my thinking about Cobb. And for instance, the house for the gardener at Ronchon. We have all been to Ronchon at least 3 times each. But we always miss the gardener's house. And we have a model of the gardener's house. So that's interesting to me. Or Villa Savoie. Everyone has been to Villa Savoie, but we always walk past and don't notice or care for the house or the gardener again, or the caretaker right at the entrance. So I think we have got a model of that one too. So I mean, I think that is talking about unbuilt or built and unknown and unnoticed. I think the unbuilt works are the important things, and I myself have learned something and corrected my own thinking. Even where is Bijan? Is Bijan here? So we are talking about Syracuse and Werner Seligman. Werner Seligman talks about the Villa Savoie, talks about the Villa Stein, talks about the greatest hits, but very rarely do we talk about the unbuilt works. And I think, in many ways, even as a practitioner, I dare say that I think our best works remain unbuilt, because maybe the ideas were just too crazy or anything like that. So, yes, unbuilt works.
I have a question. So, to your point about the greatest hits,
Yeah.
from an interiors standpoint, we all studied Villa Savoie and a lot of other things. We know historically when we've studied furniture and history, there's the few iconic pieces that we all know from Corbusier, the recliner and the grand comfort and all of those. In your studies, I feel like there's, with this amount of work, I feel like there's got to be a hidden treasure somewhere of other furniture and interior pieces that we have not seen yet, because we only know the greatest hits. Did you uncover any of that in your research or studies of Corbusier's work?
The short answer is we actually have started building models in the other set of furniture. But I told the interns, do it, but once you get started, there's no end to it already. Yeah, there's no end to it. But we do have some furniture, 5 or 6 pieces.
But that's what I'm saying. We know of the 5 or 6 pieces. Is there some hidden vault out there that is yet to be discovered? Because he had to furnish these.
Yeah.
Because at the time, the furniture that was in vogue did not work with the architecture. So that's, why everybody started creating their own furniture.
I'm glad you brought it up. I thought about it and I put it away because personally I'm also just very tired already with these. But it's something to look at in the furniture and the cabinetry and all that.
I have a follow-up question that we're migrating.
Right.
So one of the things that Corbu is so well known for is la modular, and we saw it in your presentation, the scale of man's relationship to human furnishings in the built environment. And so I was wondering, in all of these models and drawings and explorations, where is the human scale explored in the context of the built environment in the architectural setting? Is there, was there evidence of that, or was that related only to the design of furniture and not the built environment? So I was interested in that part of this work.
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes, and we have started addressing it, especially in a larger scale version of his cabin at the south of France. I don't know if it's here or it belongs to the other group, because we have a little one here, but we have a larger one as well. And in the larger one, we could start thinking, the interns at least, thinking about dimensions and proportions of things. But that is actually a relevant question. And I think we have not gotten to that stage yet with the other things, even with the unité d'habitations, which is supposed to be generated by the modular. I personally am not enough of a scholar to actually go down that route with the interns. But it's something, I'm glad you brought it up, because if we were to take this to the next level, we will start there. Yeah.
I don't have a particular answer to your question, but you're being called from behind you. In buildings that I have visited of Le Corbusier, I can say that the compression of space and the expansion of space play a significant role in one's experience of these buildings. And the compression of space is totally to the human body, like really compressing to the human body, and then an explosion of giant space, light, color, and so on and so forth. So I haven't done the research work to be able to answer your question with some backup, but just from personal anecdotal experience, I would say absolutely a centerpiece, I would say, of his thinking.
Yeah, there's a Spanish scholar on Le Corbusier, Josep Class. I don't even know if he's alive still. He was very influential in the 90s. He was writing, and he explained most of Corbu's work through the idea of experience, bodily experience, through sort of a phenomenological perspective and so on. And for him, it's exactly what you were saying. You always, it's like these were architectural frames for sensory experience, right? And the composition of the forms, there was always almost like a scaffolding for that experience, right? So I think, in a way, whether big or small or monumental or, the Mill Honors is a small institutional building, is an office building, you could say.
Right.
Yeah.
But look, the richness it has, right?
Yeah.
It's all of the levels, how you reach there, the ramp, the stair, so all of that effort is actually to make that experience as complex and exciting as possible. So to me, it's embedded even in the most monumental in Chandigarh buildings.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been a 2-hour lecture if I tried to go into the movement in the Mill Owners. So many of the changes that were made in the process were related to the way that a body experiences space, and the way that a body experiences space in movement. It's not about static people in space. It's always about, there are many people who have written about Le Corbusier, the architectural promenade, connections to cinema, and this idea of human being as a mobile, ambulatory individual, not static, connecting the static to pre-modern and ambulatory to the modern. So for sure, it's a centerpiece of his thinking. The villa I showed, Besnus, which is somewhere over there from 22, it's all about the way you move around in it. And this notion of bodies making continuous turns in the same direction. So in Besnus, you are always making left-handers. You walk in, left hand up the stair, another left hand. You go around the big wall, another left hand to the climax. In mill owners, to get to the climax of the building on the top floor, the meeting hall, up the ramp, right-hander, 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 right? So he's thinking about, I'm not sure if I would call it scale, but for sure about scale, but more than scale. It's about the way we experience space. In mill owners, there are different ways that one experiences space. Like on the second floor where the meeting hall is, it's a completely fluid experience of space, which is that there's no, at least conventional way of defining a space with walls. The space is composed by only objects that float in a large landscape. On the lower floors, there are walls that confine a particular experience. So for sure, he's very much thinking about it and composing it and massaging it. I would say it's scale, but more.
Yeah, picking up on that and from what David said, the Mill Owners Association is an office building, but it doesn't feel like the office building that we know it. So the question is why? And then there was mention about scale. I think the reason why the Mill Owners doesn't look like an office building, it's because of its, yes, space and experience, but because of its details as well. And I think thinking further, there is a consistency in Corbusier's works in the details, whether it's a house, office building, the Marseille block housing, this or that. I think an aspect that not many people talk about is the issue of details and scale and how it relates and may bring us back to the question of the modular. Flora Samuel has written a book on the details of Corbusier, but I don't think she talks about it much in relation to the modular. And so I was thinking also, why is there such a consistency? The more I think about it now, we were at the Marseille block, not the Marseille block, the Femini block, and the one in Brie just last year. I took the students there. Huge buildings, but you find nice details. And then wherever you go, actually, you find a consistency of details. And why? I think it probably came from his non-architectural work, painting. I think his painting activities probably made him think and react differently towards making architecture big or small. Because the painting is never too huge, although he had done some murals here and there. But I think the painting aspects is also a little bit understudied. Talking about conferences, when the models were in Barcelona, the university organized 5 lectures by 5 Iberian scholars on Le Corbusier. It was supposed to be 15 minutes each. It ended up almost an hour and a half each. And everyone was waiting to go to lunch. I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea. So one talked about painting, one talked about landscape, one talked about materials, one talked about form, another person even talked about video and movie making. So I think there's enough. There's something in Corp for everyone. I just don't know enough because we are just practicing architects. I got a few lessons from Syracuse, from Princeton, from teachers who are now all dead. Actually, I wish they were still alive. They can see these things. At least you would have shown that I learned something from them.
Maybe get one more question that jumps scale a little bit, especially when we talk about context, then it's not just about the context of when the work was created, but also the context we are looking today at the work in the past. And I think that from an architectural educator's perspective, working with students, talking about the Corbusier, maybe some of us share that to an extent. It's more, for me at least, becoming a question also about the larger role of the architects, the worldview, the city, the time, when we talk about international style, Siam, when we talk about this role of how the architect in society plays also viewpoints, and it really represents that zeitgeist of an era and how we look back. Could you talk a little bit about how you think that, especially in times of global crises, of change, how can we look back and take lessons from that time? How should we work with students to look at that time? Or how also could we envision somebody like Corbusier in a contemporary setting addressing some of these challenges that we face beyond the object scale, and what architecture could do urbanistically or to contribute to a larger urban climate?
I've been thinking about that as well, and I think there are two answers to it, good and bad. The bad thing is that I think it's generally agreed that Corb was not a great urban planner, and he had problems developing and designing cities that would have killed the European city. So because of that, the newer set of models, we have been building Corbusier's sketches, unbuilt city plans. So I think, so the bad thing is, I think if a lot of his cities were built, I think we would not have liked what would have been built. However, in the East especially, and I keep saying China, because when I go to China, it blows my mind. And what Corp couldn't do 100 years ago, they are doing it right now. So in a funny way, that's a good thing because, well, the cities, I think the Chinese are enjoying it. They are living a good life. Not just the Chinese, but societies that can cope with those things. So I'm also not sure where the truth lies, but there is evidence that I think there are extremes in the experiential part. And we are talking about cities. I guess I'm talking about it. We recently built the plan for Assam by Corbusier. And everyone who looks at the plan for Assam in 1935 will say that immediately Corbusier is the most insensitive guy, wiped out half of Paris and did his things. But we took a closer look, and there is evidence in the drawings that tells you Corb actually was sensitive and careful enough not to touch a lot of the important buildings. He never destroyed the Notre Dame, the Louvre. He never destroyed the Gare du Nord, or is it the East Station, the Magdalene Church, the Opera House. If you look closely at that plan, he never destroyed these things. He kept them, and he made some sense out of those things that he was trying to save. So I guess at the end, I'm also confused, by this enigma. And another thing I think people don't talk enough about is the role of painting in Corb's life. I do believe that painting, he was never trained as an architect. And I think painting liberated him. And others who were not trained as architects, Frank Lloyd Wright, Mies van der Rohe as well, they never really had formal training. So, yeah. So Corb remains an enigma, and I think he's worth introducing to students. Let them go and evaluate for themselves and decide whether this guy is a good example or not. I think that's our job, just to put it out there. People can see if they like slab blocks, curved buildings. One of my favorite projects is the unbuilt Olivetti building, the Olivetti Center. We have a section model over there. So anyway, I don't know if I answered your question.
So there were a few major crises during his time. And I would say that he dealt with them both in positive and very negative ways. So World War I, the destruction led him to think about housing for the masses. Like nobody was thinking about housing for the masses. And so he started thinking, even developing proposals for unitized house, all of that. So I would say there's something pretty positive there. World War II, his I don't want to say associations, but the fact that his interest in getting projects ran over other things ethically that he probably did not believe in or did not want to believe in. So his associations are trying to get work from the Nazi regime, trying to get work from the communist regime, right? He was not a sympathizer, but he actually tried to get work from them. Where if we look at his ethical insistence in his buildings, in the buildings, it is phenomenal. He just would not be deterred from things he wanted in the buildings, right? But he did not have the same stand in terms of to whom to cater, which clients, right? So he was really after getting projects. So I would say that in times of crisis, he both did well and not so well. And there's a lesson there, right? So we have to learn from the good and the bad.
Yeah, talking about that. When I was at the Foundation de Corbusier a couple of years back, Bridget Bouvier wanted to show me the rooftop. And we were up there. And she asked me, what do you think, Rene, about Nazi regime, communists, and things like that? And before I could say anything, she offered her view of it. She thinks Cobb is an opportunist who would never stopped at an opportunity regardless of ethics. And he just wanted to get his stuff built. She was very quick to, so I brought up the Nazi thing. She was very quick to point out that, but he did work for the communists as well. It is not as though he was ideologically rooted with one and a singular regime. He was just doing work for anyone. Yeah. And even for the poorest man, yeah, there are some stuff that were unbuilt. The unbuilt stuff fascinates me.
So, there was a question earlier about things which happen in the future which we cannot think about or imagine at the time. And I was reminded of this movie called The Man Who Knew Infinity. It's about a mathematician, an Indian mathematician with the name of Ramanujan, who was not schooled in math. And he had notebooks in the 20s, notebooks of mathematical conditions to which he had solutions. And he gets connected to people at Oxford. They read his papers and they find him to be an absolute genius beyond. So he was solving problems that didn't yet exist. And now the problems he was trying to solve actually exist in the world of mathematics. And they're using the solutions that he provided without even the problem existing. So there's something to be said about that. I'm not suggesting that Corb is one of those. He may be, but this blew my mind, right? So this mathematician is working aesthetically. Like he's solving math problems aesthetically. He's like imagining the most beautiful way to solve a problem. And he doesn't always know all the formulas and doesn't. So when he goes to Oxford, they're trying to train him in the way of research in order to solve a problem. This is what you need to do. And he is already like 800 steps ahead. He's got the solution, but he doesn't know how to get from here to there. It's a fantastic movie. I have a mathematician neighbor who gave me 2 books. I told him about this movie. He gave me 2 books on Ramanujan and I read them. And it is just out of this world. This stuff, it's really like dreams. You cannot imagine, is this really possible? But there it is. Anyway, so yes, indeed, it's possible. I'm not saying it's regular, but it's possible.
next one.
I have a quick question. This is a quick question, I promise everyone. So your students that built, your interns that built all the models, amazing work. I'm sure they learned a lot. Do you see a potential for them exploring VR in terms of giving a different kind of experience through the models that were built? Since you have now all the components, it would be not easy, but doable to take some of the buildings and give others that experience. I'm just wondering about the technology interface.
Yeah.
You're gonna go home with an assignment, I think.
Yeah, so I'm good at that, and I am good at that.
The short answer is we have explored that because once they get the digital model done, they can do virtual reality, walk through, run through. You can do anything, you can mount the thing and recompose it in different ways. But we have not really pursued it yet because, again, I think I personally don't have energy to manage these guys,
It is very technical.
Yeah. I think once you have the digital model, you can do a lot of things. And you can do a lot of things.
Thank you.
I'm not suggesting you should do this, but we have a faculty at Penn State who worked with a site in Rio, one of the favelas, and he went to the favela with a 3D scanner on his head and walked around the entire place. And so he made a VR model, and I put on I'm like the last person who knows anything about technology, but I put this on, and it was pretty interesting. Like it gave me a sense of the place which was different than what I would see on pictures and plans and so on.
Mm.
So there you may in fact go.
Future you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you, everybody.
We started talking about hand drawings and we ended up with VR. So the Corbusier has this blueprint. Thank you. Thanks
Thank
a lot,
you
Rene.
for
Thanks,
moderating.
everybody.